My name is Dr. Alina Vasquez. I'm 41 years old, and I died on a Wednesday afternoon in Seattle during what was supposed to be a routine outpatient procedure. One moment, I was lying on the exam table making small talk with the nurse about my daughter's upcoming piano recital, and the next, I felt my chest tighten in a way that made every medical alarm in my brain start screaming. I tried to say something, but my voice wouldn't work. Tried to reach for the call button, but my arm felt like it belonged to someone else. And then there was a sensation like falling backward through myself, through layers of awareness I didn't know existed, until the physical world just stopped being where I was. The nurse told me later that I'd been gone for almost 9 minutes, that my heart had stopped, and they'd worked on me frantically while calling for the crash cart, that I'd turned a shade of blue she'd never seen on someone who came back. But during those 9 minutes, I wasn't in that sterile room at all. I was somewhere else, experiencing something that would completely rewrite everything I thought I understood about what happens when we die and what heaven actually means. I need to tell you what I saw, not because I want to convince you of anything, but because what I experienced changed how I see every single person I pass on the street, every patient I treat, every moment of this strange, brief thing we call life. If stories like this matter to you, if you've ever wondered what might be waiting on the other side of that final breath, then what I'm about to share might shift something in how you see the world around you right now. The first thing that surprised me was that I could still think. I'd spent 15 years as an emergency room physician, seen hundreds of people die, and I'd always assumed death was just lights out, consciousness ending like a switched-off television. But my thoughts were clearer than they'd ever been, sharper somehow, like I'd been seeing through smudged glass my whole life, and someone had finally cleaned it. I became aware that I was moving, or being moved, through something that wasn't quite space, toward something that wasn't quite light, but was the closest word I had for it. There was no fear, which shocked me, because I'd always been terrified of dying, but fear seemed like something that belonged to bodies, and I didn't seem to have one anymore. What I did feel was an overwhelming curiosity, mixed with something I can only describe as homesickness for a place I'd never been. As I moved closer to this light that wasn't exactly light, I started becoming aware of a presence, or maybe multiple presences, I couldn't quite tell. They weren't threatening, but they were vast, and I had the strange sense that they'd been expecting me, that somehow this appointment had been scheduled long before that Wednesday afternoon. Then the light resolved into something more defined, and I saw him. Though saw isn't the right word, because I was perceiving him with senses I didn't have when I was alive. Jesus stood there, and nothing about how he looked matched any painting I'd seen in churches or Sunday school books from my childhood. He was more real than real, if that makes sense. Like everything else I'd ever experienced had been a copy, and this was the original. His eyes held something I'd never seen in any human face, a combination of infinite gentleness and absolute knowing, like he could see every moment of my life simultaneously and somehow still looked at me with love rather than disappointment. I expected him to speak, to say something profound or judgmental or welcoming, but instead he just looked at me with a question in his eyes that I somehow understood without words. The question was simple, but it shattered something in me. Do you understand why you're here? And I realized I didn't. Not really, not in the way he meant. I'd been raised Catholic, drifted away in college, returned to church after my daughter was born, mostly because my husband thought we should raise her with some kind of moral framework. I believed in God in a vague sort of way, figured I was probably good enough to make the cut because I dedicated my life to healing people, and I'd never done anything terrible. But standing there in front of Jesus with that question hanging between us, I understood that I'd completely missed something essential, something that had nothing to do with being good enough or bad enough, but with something else entirely. Before I could try to answer, he lifted his hand, and suddenly I was seeing my life again, but not as a simple replay. I was experiencing it from multiple perspectives simultaneously, feeling not just what I'd felt, but what others had felt in their interactions with me, seeing the ripples of every choice I'd made spreading out in ways I'd never noticed when I was living through it. I saw myself as a child, bright and curious and desperate to make my parents proud. I saw the moment I decided to become a doctor, partly from genuine desire to help people, but partly from need for status and security and the kind of respect that came with the title. I watched myself go through medical school, becoming harder, more efficient, more focused on diagnoses than on the humans attached to those diagnoses. I saw the exact moment during my residency when I'd stopped seeing patients as people and started seeing them as problems to solve or failures to avoid.
There was this one scene that hurt to watch. A night in the ER when an elderly woman had been brought in after a fall. She'd been confused and frightened, kept asking for her daughter who died years earlier, and I'd treated her with impatience disguised as professional efficiency. I'd gotten her stabilized and processed and moved to a room, all textbook perfect, but I'd never once looked her in the eyes or touched her hand or acknowledged the terror she was feeling. She died 2 days later, and I'd barely remembered her name. Now I was experiencing it from her perspective, feeling her loneliness and fear, her desperate need for just one person to see her as a human, rather than a case number. The shame that hit me was physical, even though I didn't have a body anymore. Jesus didn't say anything, but I felt him asking another wordless question. Did you love them? And I wanted to say yes, wanted to defend myself by pointing to all the lives I'd saved, all the technically perfect care I'd provided, all the hours I'd worked trying to keep people alive. But standing there, seeing my life through this new lens, I realized I'd loved the idea of being a healer far more than I'd loved the people I was healing. I'd loved the challenge and the respect and the feeling of competence, but the actual patients had been almost incidental, means to an end rather than the point of everything. Then he showed me something else, something that made me understand why so few people truly comprehend what heaven is. I saw millions of other people, some I recognized from Earth and countless I didn't, all approaching this same place I was in. Some came with an openness that let them move forward easily, like they'd been preparing for this their whole lives, even if they didn't know it. But others, so many others, reached a certain point and just stopped, unable to continue forward, not because they were being blocked, but because something in them couldn't tolerate the atmosphere of complete truth and unveiled love that existed there. It wasn't about having believed the right things or belonged to the right church or followed the right rules. It was about whether they'd developed a capacity to exist in the presence of love that saw everything and loved anyway. The people who'd spent their lives hiding behind masks, performing versions of themselves for approval, had made their inner selves so rigid and defended that they couldn't survive the nakedness of being fully known. It would have been like asking someone who'd lived their whole life in a cave to suddenly stare at the sun. The people who'd spent their lives in bitterness and judgment had made their hearts so hard that the softness of unconditional love was actually painful to them, like acid on stone. They didn't need to be sent away.
They sent themselves away, backing out of the light, not because they were being punished, but because they'd made themselves unable to bear the very thing they'd been created for. If you feel there's more to understand about what really matters, about what we're actually preparing for during these brief, strange years of being alive, then stay with me, because what I saw next changed how I understand every human interaction I witness. Jesus showed me something about heaven that nobody had ever explained to me in Sunday school or theology classes. Heaven wasn't a place you went to after you passed some test or accumulated enough good deeds. Heaven was the full, unveiled presence of love itself, of God who is love, and our entire lives on earth were just practice for learning to exist in that presence. Every time we chose connection over isolation, vulnerability over defense, forgiveness over bitterness, generosity over greed, we were building capacity to exist in that atmosphere. Every time we chose the opposite, we were making ourselves more rigid, more defended, more unable to tolerate the very thing our souls had been made to experience. I saw that this wasn't about morality in the way I'd understood it, wasn't about following rules or avoiding sins on some list. It was about becoming the kind of being who could exist in total love without dissolving, who could be fully known without shame, who could receive infinite generosity without suspicion. The tragedy wasn't that God was keeping people out of heaven. The tragedy was that people were making themselves incapable of surviving there, building walls so thick to protect themselves from the small hurts of earthly life that they couldn't receive the healing of eternal life. Then he showed me something about my own life that broke me completely. I saw all the moments I'd chosen safety over connection, all the times I'd protected my heart by keeping people at arm's length, all the walls I'd built that I'd convinced myself were professional boundaries, but were really just fear of being truly seen. I'd spent 41 years becoming someone who was technically competent but emotionally unavailable, someone who could save lives but couldn't really touch them, someone who'd traded intimacy for control. And standing there in front of love itself, I understood that I'd been preparing myself for the exact opposite of heaven, making myself into someone who couldn't survive in the presence of complete openness, even though that's what I'd been created for. The vision expanded, and I saw something about the world I'd left behind, something about the moment in history we're living through right now. I saw millions of people, maybe billions, all living behind screens and walls and carefully curated versions of themselves. I saw them communicating constantly, but connecting rarely, performing happiness while drowning in loneliness, building networks of thousands while knowing almost no one truly.
I saw the way they were learning to experience anger as entertainment, outrage as bonding, judgment as virtue. I saw how they were teaching their children to do the same, passing down the armor like an inheritance. Every small choice to turn away from genuine connection was like a brick in the wall between who they were and who they'd been created to become. Every moment of choosing comfort over vulnerability was practice for being someone who couldn't survive in perfect love. Every time they nursed a grudge or indulged in contempt or turned a human into an enemy was making them more rigid, more defended, more incapable of the very thing that would save them. And the most tragic part was that most of them had no idea they were doing it, had convinced themselves that their defensiveness was wisdom, their judgment was discernment, their isolation was independence. They thought they were protecting themselves when actually they were imprisoning themselves, building walls that would eventually become their tombs. I saw that this was the real crisis facing humanity, not the political divisions or economic inequalities or environmental disasters everyone was worried about. Those were just symptoms.
The disease was the slow death of the capacity for vulnerable connection, the gradual hardening of millions of hearts, happening one small defended choice at a time. And I saw that time was running out, not because some apocalypse was coming, but because each generation was teaching the next to be even more defended, even more isolated, even more incapable of the openness that heaven requires. Within a few more generations, there might be almost no one left who could survive in the presence of unveiled love, almost no one who'd practiced being fully known and loved anyway. Jesus didn't tell me any of this directly, but I understood it all in the way you understand things in dreams, directly and completely, without needing explanation. Then he showed me one more thing, something about why I'd been allowed to see all of this. I saw my daughter, Emma, who was 9 years old, and already learning from me how to be defended, how to choose safety over connection, how to build walls around her heart. I saw the exact moment a few weeks earlier when she'd tried to tell me about being left out by her friends at school, how she'd come to me for comfort, and I'd immediately gone into problem-solving mode, suggesting strategies and solutions, instead of just being present with her pain. I'd done what I always did, tried to fix instead of feel, to solve instead of stay, to control instead of connect. And I saw her face in that moment, saw the way she'd closed down just a little bit, learned just a tiny bit more that it wasn't safe to be vulnerable even with her own mother. I saw the trajectory she was on, becoming more like me, more defended, more competent, more alone. And I understood that I was being sent back not because I deserved another chance, but because Emma and thousands like her needed someone to show them a different way, needed to see that walls could come down, that hearts could soften, that it was possible to live open even in a world that rewarded closure. Then Jesus asked me one final, wordless question, and this one hurt most of all. Will you return different? Not better in some moral sense, not more religious or more righteous, but different at the core, willing to tear down the walls you've spent 4 decades building, willing to risk the vulnerability you've spent your whole life avoiding, willing to practice now what you'll need to survive in eternity. I wanted to say yes immediately, but something in his eyes made me understand that he was asking whether I was willing to actually become someone new, rather than just promising to try harder at being who I'd always been. I felt myself being pulled back then, like a fish on a line, away from that place of terrible clarity and devastating love. The last thing I remember before I slammed back into my body was Jesus' eyes, holding not judgment, but something like hope mixed with sorrow, as if he knew how hard it would be to stay changed once I was back in the world that had shaped me into someone defended. I woke up gasping on the examination table, with medical staff surrounding me, their faces showing relief mixed with professional curiosity about what had caused the arrest in someone with no heart disease history. My first words weren't about what happened or how I felt, but, "Where's Emma?" They told me my daughter was in the waiting room with my husband, that they'd been called as soon as the code was initiated, that they'd been terrified, but everything was fine now. But I knew everything wasn't fine, knew I couldn't go back to being who I'd been, knew I'd been given something I didn't deserve and couldn't ignore. The first thing I did when I was cleared to leave the hospital was ask my husband to bring Emma back. When she ran into the room, her eyes red from crying and her face tight with fear, I didn't immediately try to calm her or reassure her. Instead, I held out my arms, and when she crashed into me, I just held her, really held her, feeling every emotion moving through her small body without trying to fix any of it. After a while, she pulled back and asked if I was okay, and instead of giving her the quick reassurance I usually would have offered, I told her the truth. I said I'd been somewhere else and seen something that changed me, that I'd realized I'd been loving her wrong, protecting her from all the painful things instead of being present with her through them. I told her I wanted to try something different, wanted to learn how to be her mother in a way that made her feel truly known instead of just safely managed. She looked confused, like she couldn't quite process what I was saying, but she nodded and stayed close to me in a way she hadn't in years. That night, I started taking down walls I'd spent 4 decades building, began the painful work of learning to exist in my own life the way I'd need to exist in heaven, open and vulnerable and willing to be fully known. It's been 8 months since I died and came back, and nothing about my external life has changed dramatically, but everything about how I move through it is different. I still work in the emergency room, but I look patients in the eyes now, touch their hands, acknowledge their fear instead of just their symptoms. I'm slower, less efficient by the metrics my hospital uses, but something shifts in the room when I treat people as people rather than problems. My colleagues think I'm burned out or depressed or maybe damaged by the cardiac arrest, but some of the older nurses, the ones who've seen everything, look at me with something like recognition, as if they know what happened even though I haven't found words to explain it. With Emma, I'm learning to stay present with her difficult emotions instead of trying to make them go away, to ask questions instead of offering solutions, to admit when I don't know what to do instead of pretending competence. She's starting to tell me things she never would have before, small confidences that break my heart and heal something in me simultaneously. With my husband, I'm trying to dismantle the careful partnership we'd built that looked like intimacy, but was really just 2 defended people efficiently managing a household together. He doesn't understand what's changed or why I suddenly want to talk about feelings he's never seen me express, but he's trying to meet me in this new vulnerable space I'm occupying. Sometimes I fail completely, fall back into the defended patterns I spent my whole life perfecting, but I catch myself faster now, remember what I saw, remember that every choice to stay defended is practice for being unable to survive in love. The hardest part is watching other people doing what I used to do, seeing them build walls and call it boundaries, choose safety and call it wisdom, turn away from connection and call it self-care. I want to grab them and tell them what I saw, explain that they're preparing themselves for the exact opposite of what they were made for, warn them that time is shorter than they think, and their hearts are getting harder than they know.
But I'm learning that you can't tell people this, can't explain it in words that make sense, can only try to live it in a way that maybe makes them curious about what changed. My name is Dr. Elena Vasquez, and I died for 9 minutes on a Wednesday afternoon in Seattle. What I saw on the other side wasn't what I expected, wasn't about following rules or believing right things or being good enough. It was about whether we're becoming people who can survive in the presence of complete love, whether we're practicing vulnerability now that will allow us to exist fully known later, whether we're building capacity for connection or walls that will eventually become prisons. I saw that most people are preparing themselves for the opposite of heaven without realizing it, making themselves more defended with each small choice, harder with each judgment, more isolated with each moment of choosing safety over truth. I saw that time is running out, not because God is impatient, but because we're becoming incapable of receiving what we were made for, like plants growing in darkness until they can't survive light anymore. I came back different, not because I'm special, but because I was shown something I couldn't unsee, given a choice I couldn't unmake. Every day now is practice, learning to take down walls, learning to risk being known, learning to exist here the way I'll need to exist there. It's harder than anything I've ever done, and more important than anything I've ever accomplished. And I wonder sometimes, looking at people around me building their walls and calling it wisdom, whether they'll figure it out in time, whether they'll realize what they're actually preparing for before their hearts become so defended that love itself becomes unbearable. I don't know the answer. I only know that heaven isn't what I thought it was, that few truly understand what we're being prepared for, and that every moment we're choosing whether to become someone who can survive in perfect love, or someone who'll have to turn away from it because we've made ourselves unable to bear being fully known. Which are you becoming? That's not rhetorical. That's the question that matters most, the one we're answering with every defended choice, every moment of choosing isolation over vulnerability, every brick we add to walls we tell ourselves are keeping us safe, but are really just making us alone. The door is still open, but doors don't stay open forever, and hearts don't stay soft if we keep choosing to harden them. What I saw suggests we have less time than we think.